So good morning, everyone. Thanks, Sherry, and good to meet fellow panelists, Doris and Leonora as well. It's really my pleasure to be here. I'm Fatimah Alsagoff. I'm based in Singapore, and I'm Director of Public Affairs for the Asia Pacific region. So I work at UPS, and we operate one of the world's largest aircraft fleets with over 1,000 international flight segments, 1,154 US domestic flight segments every single day. And of course, the air cargo services that we offer play a really pivotal role in ensuring that time-critical shipments, whether it's life-saving medical supplies, pieces for urgent repairs, inputs into global supply chains, all of these things reach their destinations in a safe and timely fashion. The fact that we operate in over 220 economies and territories worldwide rely heavily on open borders, and that's meant that we're particularly exposed to the effects of both the pandemic itself as well as all the measures that governments have had to put in place to address it. But despite this challenge, we're really proud that because of our global reach, we've been playing a critical role in helping to win the war against COVID. So let me actually first start with a bird's eye perspective of the unprecedented impact that the crisis had on air cargo capacity worldwide. So just going back, recall that in the beginning of 2020, the crisis was still limited to within China and some parts of Asia, but it was not that widespread yet. So what we saw was that around late January, early February, we started seeing cases appearing in many more countries. And then the bans on travel to and from China initially started to spread. So under normal circumstances, roughly half of global air cargo capacity is what we call belly cargo, where cargo is shipped in the belly of passenger aircraft. So it's, under normal circumstances, it's roughly half that is in the bellies of passenger aircraft. But thanks to all these initial travel bans and all the flight cancellations, we started seeing capacity reductions, but this was still limited to intra-Asia lanes and those from Asia to other regions. Intra-Asia capacity went down 54% in the week of February 12th compared to January 25th to 31st. This is in 2020. On the other hand, transatlantic lanes saw slight increases in capacity. So the suggestion is that capacity is being reallocated to other parts of the world. Contrast this with the final week of March last year. By this time, you had more governments not only imposing travel bans, but more of them began imposing a state of emergency or some form of city or countrywide lockdown of the population. For instance, you had France, Britain, India beginning to impose their lockdowns. The EU began to bar any travelers from outside of the EU bloc. The US on March 26th became the country with the highest number of COVID cases. All of this had an unprecedented impact on global air cargo capacity. And compared to 2019, all trade lanes across the world started seeing double-digit declines. Most key trade lanes have lost more than 30% capacity, some even lost 60% of capacity. So unprecedented impact. By the end of March, passenger belly capacity had gone down 80%, only 20% of it was still flying. And the shortfall, as you can see, was barely made up by airline and express freighters. As of October 8th this year, there's still a total of 229 countries and territories that have imposed some form of travel restriction due to COVID. Of these, 51 of them were imposed within the last 7 days. I remember checking these same statistics back in April last year, and it was 227 countries and territories at that time that had some form of restriction. So it's, same number of places that have some kind of restriction. Needless to say, this pretty much decimated commercial travel within the first weeks of the pandemic emerging. Today, of course, it's encouraging to hear that more economies are progressively liberalizing some of these restrictions, which is great. I'm sure all of us are looking forward to some kind of normalization, but it will, of course, take some time for things to normalize globally. So it won't be happening anytime too soon. UPS, like other companies in the logistics industry, has absolutely been on the front lines of this. COVID has impacted what we do in so many ways. The travel bans, the new restrictions, they created a patchwork of different requirements that we have had to navigate. It's been a very complex past 1 to 2 years, 1.5 years. And this is especially complex when you're managing a global network, a global air network. An issue or strong restrictions or sudden new restrictions affecting one node will have ripple effects on the rest of the network. And we tackle these things all the time in normal circumstances, but the pandemic has generated these the need for quick decision making in multiple places all at the same time, and they all have ripple effects throughout the network. But in spite of that difficulty, I'm really proud that we and our fellow members of the industry have risen to the challenge. We've worked with governments to secure different solutions that have allowed us to continue to deliver our service. So in terms of ensuring air network continuity, we have, for example, sought exemptions for our pilots to cross borders without being subject to 14-day or whatever the time frame is nowadays, without being subject to quarantine laws, just assuring governments that because cargo pilots don't interact with the public in the performance of their job, the risk level there is minimal. And we've worked with governments to secure what we call a closed loop system or isolate at hotel protocols. And this exists in many different economies and territories. And the idea is that it provides flexibility for crew scheduling and supports the required rest hours. By regulation, crew require minimum number of rest hours in order to operate flight. And what this closed loop system involves is, crew need to go straight to hotels that are designated hotels. They cannot leave. They stay there. They don't interact with the public, and then they go out for their next flight. And this is all tracked and made sure of. And so this allows us to continue providing that service. Where exemptions were not provided, this was the case in the early stages, I think, where a lot of governments were figuring out what to do. In some cases, we secured exemptions to do what we called quick turnarounds. That means you land the aircraft and then immediately the crew will then leave again without disembarking from the aircraft. So this is something that we needed in the beginning stages of pandemic, but obviously a closed-loop system is a lot better for us operationally. And then in terms of the final mile, most governments around the world designated our services as essential, and so we were allowed to continue delivering every day. Of course, in the early stages of the pandemic, there are different measures being put in place. In some places, governments would implement checkpoints, so we would have to ensure that our employees were recognized as essential workers and they can get to and from workplaces safely and unhindered. And it's not just the friendly UPS package driver in his brown uniform that has to do his or her job. It's also those that do customs clearance, customs brokerage, those that manage hub operations, loading and unloading of aircraft. There are all kinds of frontline employees that need to be able to work in spite of all the lockdowns. So governments have ensured that these employees are recognized as essential, can continue to get to their workplace unhindered. And then finally, governments also ensured that cross-border trucking of goods could continue. We needed to ensure that coming through land checkpoints, it could be some solutions involved a driver crossing the border and then goods being unloaded by unloaders in the receiving economy, but there would be no interaction between the driver and then the unloader. So the little things like that we had to be creative about and think about. Apologies, did my share screen disappear? Oh dear. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay. All right, so of course, although the opportunities for passenger travel are much more limited these days, people around the world still need life-saving medical supplies, personal protection equipment, and goods for daily living. It's all the more critical that we keep air cargo moving to support these needs and keep supply chains resilient. So IATA, for example, has called for urgent government action to be put into place. For instance, removing operating hour curfews for cargo flights, easing slot restriction to support air cargo operations during these times as one thing. And then I'm getting a note that I need to wrap up real quick. But in terms of recommendations as well, ensuring that we can continue to operate, there are certain things that we recommend be put in place. For instance, developing harmonized principles that limit the restrictions on aircrew who, like I said just now, they present a different risk profile. They don't interact with the public. So avoiding medical quarantines, detention for observation, developing common protocols to recognize digital health and vaccine certificates, as well as a harmonized framework for testing and tracing. And then finally, collectively recognizing transportation and logistics as essential services, allowed to operate with sufficient manpower to continue doing all the things that need to be done in order for us to deliver these goods. So I'll just wrap up here. Thank you so much.